I'm a big fan of letting the engine company attack the situation that's in front of them, and not necessarily, you can try to pre-plan as many of the options that you have going forward, but nobody can anticipate where cars are going to park on the street. Can we get into the building at all? Are we going to have to stop short? Are we going to have to go long? Are we going to have to back in? Just due to the terrain that we're working on. And, having the pre-connected mindset may be plan A for a lot of people, but you need to have plan B through Z, man. Just being able to start assembling these lines to go a little bit long, and shouldered hose is always a big plus. So I want as much hose on my shoulder as I can, no drag, no snag. So if I'm going long, I want that shoulder to be high, and the shoulder load to be high off the ground to where we're not snagging on anything, and every step I take, it gets lighter.
You're listening to another episode of Rig Recon Live. I'm Bruce Quick alongside Jason Whitmire. And before we get started on today's episode, make sure you follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook or Instagram. That's at Rig Recon. Visit our website, rigrecon.com, for all the latest apparatus spec information, podcast content, comparison charts, and so much more. And then most importantly, you can find this podcast wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. And if you're not watching on YouTube, you definitely should be. Turn on those post notifications so you know when all the latest content comes out. And today, Jason, we're kicking off season 3, the debut episode. So it's been quite the ride, and couldn't think of a better guest to do that than Kyle Romagus. And Kyle, before we get to you, this episode is presented by Elkhart Brass. Since 1902, Elkhart Brass has earned a reputation for quality, value, and customer service in manufacturing firefighting, fire protection, and industrial water flow equipment. And second counts and flow matters. It can be the difference between life and death, and you'll find our products ready for the job. With well over a century of innovation in firefighting and fire protection equipment, our more than 2,000 products are used in virtually every aspect of firefighting by fire departments, building systems, offshore drilling sites, military, marine, and industrial firefighting applications. For more information, you can visit elkhartbrass.com. So now that's out of the way, Kyle, we'd like to give the guest an opportunity to sort of give their background, because we know we won't do it justice. So take it away from here, Kyle. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, man, I'm happy to be here. My name's Kyle Romagus. I'm from East Montgomery County, Texas. This is my 24th year in the fire service. Spent 16 years as an engine captain, and the last 5 as a battalion chief. So I've been having fun. Just do a lot of work with the Elkhart guys on the road, and met you guys not too long ago, and have been enjoying listening to you guys' podcasts. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Welcome aboard. So Kyle, we're gonna dive in today, and we're gonna talk about a subject, and we're gonna just simply title it War Wagons. But I want to put a little disclaimer out there up front, because all too often in the fire service, we talk about, going to war, going to battle with a fire. And I know sometimes our military friends go, hey guys, there's quite a difference here. Well, I mean, there is, but you are putting your life on the line when you go in to fight that fire, typically to save people you don't know, just like our military friends are putting their lives on the line to go out and fight a battle, and they might not know us that they're fighting for. So there are similarities, but I just don't want to make anybody mad with the War Wagons comment. When we talk about War Wagons, I've got an idea in my mind what a War Wagon is, but I'd like you to define what you think a War Wagon. What does it mean to be a War Wagon?
So everybody has engines, and once you start putting in your mindset on spec and layout, and utilizing your local environment, what kind of fires you guys go to, whether you're going to mainly commercial or private dwellings or apartment complexes, or you are required to be a rescue engine, so to speak, with high coffin compartments and, large amounts of compartment space that needs to be filled with equipment. Or if you are a larger department that has specialty equipment and the engine has an ability just to be the engine, And the departments that have the ability to run engines as just engines have the great opportunity to be a War Wagon. War Wagon is a specialty engine, so to speak, in my opinion, at least, that's ready to accomplish fire suppression in all avenues. The well thought out engine with the equipment spec and the mindset of fire suppression being the main focus of that piece of equipment and being able to go to war. A lot of thought process has gone into the equipment. A lot of thought process has gone into the hose packages. Your ability to adapt and get water on the fire in any aspect makes you a War Wagon.
So really flexibility would be one of the things that we're talking about here. And just so everyone's clear, we understand that in some departments, if you're a large city department, you might not be able to set that rig up different than others, because in some departments, union rules, guys move from station to station. They want everything exactly the same on every rig. But some departments allow this flexibility, which is great if you can do that. So as we go through the podcast here and talk about War Wagons, we're going to break it down piece by piece so that we're not overwhelmed and jumping all over the place. So let's start out with our attack lines. Let's talk about if you have a preference on how you set up your attack lines, things you should be thinking about from the standpoint of how long is the lay, what type of lay is it? Is it pre-connected? And I realize this is going to differ based on the person's response district, but just some thoughts that you have to get everyone thinking about what they put into their truck.
So pre-connects are not always terrible, depending on where you work. If you're working in master development communities that are 30 feet off the roadway, and you're going to private dwelling fires mainly, maybe a pre-connect is not necessarily a terrible idea for you. But every fire department in the country most likely has the ability to go long. So you have to have a long line option. Having an option for a bulk bed, or even assembling a bulk bed out of your pre-connects, there's a lot of different ways that you can go long, but every fire department in the country, no matter where you work, you have to start thinking about how are we going long? How are we going to put together a 600-foot line? Is that 600-foot line going to contain the 3-inch, or is it going to contain 2.5? Is it going to be a 400-foot pre-connected 1.75 that you break and then add to a larger line to then remove some of that friction loss problems you have with the long 1.75 stuff? But you just have to have the ability to drive around your district and just ask your guys, what if? How are we going to get the line to the 5th floor of this apartment? How are we going to get lines into this mid-rise hotel that we have in our district, or, high-rise operations if the standpipe goes out? So being an efficient War Wagon is being able to solve those problems and have the equipment spec to do that. And your hose line packages are definitely going to either aid you or they're going to hamper you depending on what your setup is. Reflex time is a large aspect that needs to be taken into effect when you start talking about putting water on the fire in different types of buildings, whether you're going vertical, whether you're going long horizontal, but having the ability to assemble long lines, short lines, in between lines is what's going to make you valuable on the fire ground.
And one of the big things that you're talking about right there is pre-planning. So let's just think about a fire for a second. You've got a larger building, maybe it's 4 stories, and you've got a 200-foot attack line, and you go in there and you start going to work, and then you realize, we can't get up to where we need to. Breaking that line down and extending it, not really practical. The fire's not going to stop and say, wait, they're going to extend their line. Give me some time. So that's what you're talking about, right? Is thinking ahead and having the ability to stretch it out and right from the start to be ready.
Yeah, getting into these buildings and trying to figure out what your options are. Obviously, best case scenario for most mid-rise type, 75 feet and below, is going to be stretching from the street. So if we have the ability to stretch from the street because we've got a well hole, we've got open balconies, we've got stairwell openings inside the building that we can utilize for a rope stretch or a coupling drop, that's going to be able to reduce that reflex time down to be able to get water in that line on the fire floor quicker. And the only way you're going to find that out is to get out in your buildings. So we got mid-rises in my district that have no well hole. So with no well hole and an enclosed stairwell, you have limited options on being able to go vertical besides stretching in the stairwell. And if you're going to be stretching in the stairwell, your line needs to be long. And if you're going long lines, now, like we were just talking about, you got to start worrying about friction loss, pump discharge pressure. How are we going to get that line to the fire floor as fast as possible?
When it does come to a pre-connect, do you have a preference on the type of lay that someone does with a pre-connect? And again, I know this can vary depending on the application, but is there something you have found useful that you really like?
I'm a big fan of the flat load. We run the flat load. We do have Minutemans as well on the bigger lines, depending on what we're utilizing, but our pre-connects are all flat loaded. So the flat load we utilize, and you'll see coming up soon in the brass tacks videos, that I run the flat load for that. And we pull the flat load 5 different ways. So we let the stretch presented to us, let us make the decision on how we're going to stretch it. We run it as a true flat load. We can invert it as a Minuteman. I can pull it as a triple load. I can add them together to make a bulk load. We have really had a lot of good luck with the versatility of the flat load and how we run it. And the flat load gets a bad rap from a lot of people because they just pull it as a flat load. They don't utilize the versatility of it, but it is literally every other load all together if you know how to pull it. And that goes back to the War Wagon mindset, so like being able to utilize your equipment in all aspects.
And we'll look forward to it in brass tacks videos that'll explain to people how to use it properly.
For sure. I'm a big fan of letting the engine company attack the situation that's in front of them, and not necessarily, you can try to pre-plan as many of the options that you have going forward, but nobody can anticipate where cars are going to park on the street. Can we get into the building at all? Are we going to have to stop short? Are we going to have to go long? Are we going to have to back in? Just due to the terrain that we're working on. And, having the pre-connected mindset may be plan A for a lot of people, but you need to have plan B through Z, man. Just being able to start assembling these lines to go a little bit long, and shouldered hose is always a big plus. So I want as much hose on my shoulder as I can, no drag, no snag. So if I'm going long, I want that shoulder to be high and the shoulder load to be high off the ground to where we're not snagging on anything. And every step I take, it gets lighter every thing I go.
And as we're breaking this down, Kyle, let's talk about the nozzle. Do you prefer smooth, fog, or a combination, and then why?
I personally prefer smoothbore nozzles for fire tack on the interior. There is a place for fog nozzles. There's a place for Bresnans. There's a place for, specialty nozzles, but I prefer the simplicity and the large water droplet of the smoothbore nozzle. I think every engine should have fog nozzles on them for set purposes, but I will tell you this, I'm not going to turn one down. If I make a mutual aid fire and I get to the front door and they hand me a fog nozzle, I'm not giving it back to you. We're going through the front door and we're going to work, but we have preferences,
Yeah.
Have you used many combinations? What's your feeling? I'll give you my opinion on a combination. And I think we've talked about this on our podcast before. I've got some combinations on my rig, and I honestly think half the guys in the department have no idea that they could break that fog off and turn it into a smoothbore.
For sure. I've used combination nozzles for a lot of my career as well. And the smoothbore nozzle is a preference for me. Like I said, I'm not going to give it back to you. I'm not going to turn it down. But the straight stream is very effective as well. And for the nerds out there, they'll know that up to 1,000 degrees, the differences between the straight stream and the smoothbore are very limited. It's that 1,000-degree mark where the real fork in the road happens with the droplet size. But we used automatic high pressure TF or automatic high pressure nozzles. I'll save the manufacturer out, but for a large amount of my early days of my career. And we found that with the automatic nozzles that we had, they weren't serviced like they were supposed to. They weren't breaking down. They weren't broken down and greased appropriately, so everything was a big variable on the fire ground. And we moved away from the high pressure automatics to constant gallonage, low pressure, in early 2000s. And we were able, like 2005, 2006, and we were able to see a difference on the fire ground when we had an actual constant flow rate, because depending on what rig you were pulling the line off of and what pressure you were getting to it, some of the automatics, they would vary in flow rate. And that was a big problem we had on the fire ground.
It's a terrific point. One of our things we constantly hammer home on the know your flow. It's a class that our regionals are out teaching all the time. Every time I've been out and seen it, and I'm not knocking one person's nozzle here because we make some automatic nozzles ourselves, but with that automatic, we hook up and people are out there fighting 100 PSI automatic, and you say to them, what are you flowing? And they're like, oh, I got to be flowing like 175 gallons a minute. And then you hook up the flow meter and you're flowing 70, but
Yeah.
you don't know. So I think the point that you were making there that I just want to drive home for people is a lot of times with an automatic, you may be flowing low and not even realize it. Whereas with that smooth bore or a fixed gallonage, if you're not getting the right flow, you're going to realize it. The stream's going to look like crap, to put it plain and simple.
For sure. And I think a lot of people are having the wrong arguments when they get to that point, when you start talking about nozzle selection. And I think the most important argument that we can have on nozzle selection is nozzle pressure. So nozzle pressure will get you to the point where you have lower nozzle reaction. And I can't means I won't on the fire ground. So once you start talking to guys about their abilities to move the line when it's on, it all comes down to a nozzle reaction problem. The more you increase your flow rate on a higher pressure nozzle, the more the nozzle reaction creeps up with it. You can't get something for nothing. So I think the most people need to start having the nozzle pressure argument before they even get into droplet size. So the nozzle pressure argument will get you to the point where you're talking about nozzle reaction. And then now we need to talk about whether our hose will support it. And then now we're going back to the engine for pickup tube locations. And, it starts diving down rabbit holes, and it all starts with nozzle pressure.
Absolutely. So as we talk about hose, I'm going to shift the focus just a little bit back to kind of the apparatus design. People talk about hose bed heights, and I'm not talking just attack lanes, talk both attack and supply. The easy answer is I want everything as low as possible. Well, there is such a thing as too low too, because now I'm picking the hose up to put it on my shoulder and do my job. Sure. Obviously, we've seen too high where you have to crawl 2 stairs to get up on this side of a rig and get a pre-connect. What's your experience with, is there an ideal height you feel, keeping in mind that we sacrifice things when we adjust those heights?
Yeah, I like, so I built a rig spec in my head for about a decade, and I was able to get it put on paper and then actually get the piece of equipment in my fire department. And I actually got promoted the day we got it in, so I built it in my head for 10 years, was on the spec committee and built the pump panel, built the pump layout, built the hose bed. And then it arrived at my station. I got promoted to battalion. So that's, I was able to ride it for one day, but going back to your question, I spec that rig with the mindset that I want to stand flat footed on the concrete and reach my hands out and grab hose. So about chest high is about best case scenario for me. I didn't want to have to step up on anything to get hose. We did not go with cross lays. Everything was off the rear. For attack and supply, everything I can grab flat footed, just standing up straight to where I don't have to grab anything. So best case scenario would, and you're absolutely right. There is a such thing as too low once you get into the midship pumps. And then now we've got pass through cross lays that are below my waist when I'm getting them out of the rig. I don't want to have to pick the line up to get it on my shoulder, so shouldered hose is best case scenario. And at that chest high option is best case for our rigs, at least.
We kind of backed into the discussion on a previous podcast about all the pre-connects coming off the rear, or all the hand lines coming off the rear in general, whether they're pre-connected or not. I guess I'll throw the question out here. Is there any specific reason you did them all off the rear?
So we started with apparatus placement issues. We did like a Jedi mind trick on our guys. So like with cross lays, they would always block the truck out. And we would have, and the truck placement was an afterthought for the majority of our engine companies because they're parking for the stretch, right? So if the engine makes the block first, they're going to park in the position. And I use the word park intentionally because they're not placing their apparatus, they're parking it, right? So like they're going to park their apparatus in a place that's going to give them the best opportunity to get hose in a straight line to the structure, and we decided to move them to the rear because we figured they're going to still do that. And the Jedi mind trick is if I put everything off the rear, they're still going to park for the stretch. This just makes them pull past now. So like now it's not convenient for them to block the truck out to get a good stretch in. Now it's convenient for them to pull past 1 to 2 houses past in master development communities, or, at least 10 to 20 feet past the entrance point to get them in a position to get a good stretch out. So the Jedi mind trick was leaving room for the truck and letting them park the apparatus instead of place it, because some of those battles are a little bit harder to win than others.
That's awesome.
That's a good point there. And as we sort of wrap up the discussion on hose, Kyle, do you think, is there anything else important that you should consider when it comes to the hose load and the nozzle combination?
Yeah. It all comes down to equipment spec. There are some hoses on the market that are easier to pack than others. and there are some hoses on the market that are easier to pack that don't flow as well as others. So I'm a big fan of having rigid, low pressure available hose. And what you get with that is the sacrifice of being able to pack it in a small area. So like when you're building the rig spec, you're going to get widths and heights from the actual manufacturer that don't always match what hose you're actually specifically putting on the rig. So I would pay close attention to, and even go as far as building the rear of your hose bed out of wood on casters. Like if you're getting to a point to where I want to put 200 feet or 400 feet or 300 feet of this specific style of hose in an area, I would build a prop to give you an exact measurement of what that brand new hose is going to be. So like as hose gets used, it's going to have a break-in procedure, and it's going to get a little bit more pliable and a little bit more loose. But I would spec your rigs for worst case scenario. I pulled it out of the box and I'm putting on that rig right now. And being able to have those heights and widths are going to be different depending on whether you've got 188 hose, you've got 177 hose, you've got rigid, high quality, low pressure hose, or you've got higher pressure, lower rigidity hose that's going to lay flat. So like I would definitely take that into effect when you're building your apparatus spec.
Great suggestion. We spend $1 million these days on a fire truck. You're talking about putting a few hours work into making sure that it's going to work for exactly what you want, which is awesome. So let's shift our focus a little bit. We're talking about going to war. We're talking about having a crew ready to go in and attack a fire immediately. So we just talked about the hand lines and the nozzles and the selections that you have available to you there. How about hand tools? Not so much the exact tools, but maybe a complement of tools you want, where you're carrying them, and how are you getting at them quickly?
So obviously for the engine side, for a short-staffed engine, we've got to get into the building. So having a good set of irons, readily available to either the backstep or the officer is going to be best case scenario. I kept a bar inside of the officer's seat with me. So we had a G4 strap in the front that we were able to strap the bar in the front. There's a lot of apparatus spec that when you close the door, it actually closes off the bottom step. So depending on how long your bar is, you can put it on that bottom step right there. Some people mount it there, but we've got to get into the building. If you can't get into the building, you're just another guy watching the building burn. So definitely having the ability to have a set of irons close to you is beneficial. We actually kept 3 sets of irons on the rig that I spec'd. We kept one in the officer's seat. We kept one on the back step with the back step, and then we kept a set in a compartment with the bundle. So like no matter where we were getting anything from, we had an opportunity to get irons. So like if we weren't going for the cross lay or the 2.5, and we were going like say arriving 4th due, anytime I arrive after 3rd due, I always brought hose to the command post. So we would grab the bundle, we would grab the irons, and then go to the command post. And that's that mindset of being the war wagon as being useful. And that's how you get around people in staging is when you walk up ready to work. When you see the incident commander looking for another company to put a line in place, and we got 2 bundles on our shoulder. It's like, hey, chief, all I got to do is put water in the back end of this thing. Let's go. So just point me a direction. So definitely a good set of irons, multiple places on the rig, a good set of hooks as well. So like all of my chauffeurs, I always told them I wanted an attic ladder, a fan, long and a short hook at the front door as soon as we get lines on the ground. So like I come from an area to where we have low staffing. I've got 13 guys on the fire. Unless I call a second alarm, usually, and those 13 guys are split out between arrival times. So sometimes as the company officer, I'm actually exposing, attic fires and exposing fires in the walls for my guys. I don't have a truck company right behind me. So having a good set of hooks is definitely beneficial. Having a scuttle hole ladder there, a 10-foot ladder is always beneficial, but I've tried not to use them the majority of my career. There's plenty of countertops, and the best place to pull a ceiling for an attic fire is a bathroom or a closet. There's always something to stand on in those areas anyway. So depending on where your 2nd due, 3rd due, and then your truck companies are coming from, an engine company needs to have the ability to open up as well.
And it's great to ask you what the best practices are, but maybe give us a few examples of what you shouldn't do, what could be harmful or dangerous.
Are you talking about just tool spec and layout on the rig?
Yeah.
Yeah, anything that's not strapped down is obviously definitely a potential problem. So like if you're putting bars and you're putting hooks inside the rig, I would definitely take the time to mount some mounting hardware inside the rig as well. There's a lot of what ifs that can happen, inside the rig. You end up taking a wide turn, somebody steps out of the seat, if you end up rolling the rig, all those things are missiles, man. So anytime that you're mounting anything in the cab with you, I would recommend that you have some type of strapping there, or have it in a position to where it's not going to fly out and smack somebody in the face if you have a sharp turn or something, but having them readily available. Try not to put anything inside a compartment that you're going to use on a daily basis. So like if I'm using my irons on every call that I'm going to go on that starts with the word fire, I don't want to put it in the EMS cabinet that I have to move the EMS bag to get to my irons. Having a well thought out plan for that is beneficial. But that would be the biggest don'ts, I would say. I'm not a big fan of ladder racks. Ladder racks cause more reflex time. So if I can get the ladders mounted or even in a tunnel, that's best case scenario for equipment storage on that as well. If it was my house that was on fire and my wife was trapped on the second floor, I would not want to stand in the front yard and watch you have to pull down a ladder rack, to get the ladder down to get my wife. So things that people need to think about, and some of those decisions are based on your apparatus you're speccing. Like if I am working in a district where I have to be a rescue engine, I don't have a ladder truck. I've got all of this extra equipment to put on my rig, my engine. I have the ability to put all that equipment on that engine, but I sacrifice the ability to get large amount of hose on the rig, the ladder spec the way I want them. Like it's give and take. And like you guys have talked about on your podcast before, you can't get something for nothing, man. So you have to make a decision on whether or not you want to be a War Wagon or you want to be a rescue engine, because you can't be both in most cases. So like all of these rigs with all these high coffin compartments and, all this compartment space that they need, it's like they build these rigs without the mindset of where they're going to put hose and ladders on it. And then when they get the swift water vests and, the ballistic vests and all of the extra equipment, the airbags and the rope rescue equipment on this engine, and then finally at the very end of the spec committee, they're like, man, we got to put hose on this thing. Like we got to put hose and ladders here. Like, where are we going to do that? And then the only easiest answer at that point is up, which is unfortunate.
So we've covered attack lines, we've covered hand tools and some best practices for what to carry and where to carry it. Now, when I think War Wagon, I think, all right, not only can you go to attack a fire, but if you got a big fire on arrival, you can put a big knock on it right away. How about a rapid deployment, fast attack line with big water? What's your opinion on that?
I'm a big fan of the Ram. We have Rams on all of our engines. We ran another manufacturer's ground monitor for a long time, very bulky, high friction loss. Not a whole lot of ability to go negative with it. So the Ram is very beneficial. It's very compact. Friction loss is not really a huge issue. We don't run it pre-connected. We run it in a compartment because we don't use it that often. I'm not using it on every fire we go to, but we want it readily available. So having that readily available is a benefit. I don't want it up on the top of the dunnage under a foam bucket in a broom. We have it in a compartment low right next to the hose bed, to give us the ability to put that in play on commercial fires and large defensive operations. But having a mindset of how you're going to deploy those pieces of equipment that you don't readily use a lot on your fire, because the majority of the American fire service is going to war with a 3/4 or 2.5. They don't have an option for 3-inch for a lot of places, unfortunately, until they make the storefront with 3 stores going, and they need the ability to put water in 3 storefronts at a high volume with low manpower. Then they're going to start thinking about where are we going to put the ground monitor, because you can only do so much with a deck gun in a stationary position.
Right.
So having that ability to get that weapon in a position to where I can readily move it from one storefront to another, for an example, is very beneficial for that small package of the Ram XD that you guys have. But I personally don't pre-connect it.
Okay.
I pre-connect all of our lines have nozzles on them other than our bulk bed. We run a 3-inch bulk bed with a bell reducer that has 1 3/4 bundles on it as well. But we don't have enough room on our rig to pre-connect the XD Ram. So we have it in that small compartment right under the hose bed, but it's readily available. And that comes down to equipment spec as well. Like I want everything hose and fire tack related to be right close together. to where if I have to assemble something, all of my compartments are right there with the hose bed. So like if I'm having to take a nozzle off my 2.5 and grab the ram, I want it right there. I don't want to have to go to the front of the truck to get the ram and then come back to the back to where I have to remove a nozzle, and then it's all reflex time. So that mindset of being that war wagon is, how can I get these things in play as fast as possible?
You mentioned the word deck gun. Do you have deck guns on your engines now?
We do. Yeah. So we have deck guns right now. We use a movable deck gun. It does not have a rising feature. It's all preset, but it does have a rise and rock feature.
Okay.
We run a quad stack with 1 3/8 as the tip. We do have a valve on the gun itself. We put that on there. We don't spec them with a valve, an extra valve. But we want the ability for one person to be able to charge and then climb up and deploy the deck gun. So some of our rigs have ball valves. Some of our rigs have gate valves. I'm a big fan of the ball valve personally on the deck gun. I want it to be a laser beam when it comes out of the deck gun. So like a good rule of thumb is I want my outside water fast and my inside water slow. So we over pump the deck gun the way we use it. So I pump the deck gun 1 3/8 tip at 115 nozzle pressure, give me 602. And I want that thing to be a laser beam when it comes out of it. So having the ability for one person to deploy that deck gun is very beneficial.
So the point there, just in case anyone missed it, what you're talking about is, by code, you're going to have a valve on the truck to charge that deck gun. But what you're saying is you have a second valve up top that the operator can operate.
Yes, sir. So he can charge that valve from the panel and not be wasting water while it's up there. And then that second valve is going to be right behind the stream straightener.
Okay. So you do have that second valve exterior of the monitor itself.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Which we've seen in some of our brass tack sword facts videos as well.
Absolutely. I think Brush did some videos on it early in the brass tacks days. But having that valve on the deck gun is very highly beneficial. And like I said, 3-man engine company, being able to go to war, man, you want to be able to get that big water where you need it. So it gives the opportunity for the pump operator or the chauffeur or whatever you want to call him to charge the deck gun, climb up and actually position that deck gun, and then be able to initiate water flow.
So I've got one last question on deck guns, and it's that dirty word. Do you have any experience with electric, and what's your thoughts? And be free with it.
Yeah. The only experience of electricity that I've had with deck guns is the valve itself. Right. I've never had any electronic operated deck guns to where I can maneuver or anything like that, other than manual operation, pulling pins and rolling wheels. But I did have experience with a deck gun valve being electric, and it was an older one. The only experiences I've had with electric valves is bad, but this was 20 years ago, 15,
they've
20
changed
years
a lot since then.
Oh yeah.
Right.
But we're all scarred in the industry from what the history is.
Yeah. The only electronic valve I've ever had failed. So I had to actually open the deck gun with a socket wrench on a commercial fire, but like I said, 15 years ago, so simplicity has been key for me with that particular subject, but I also have not been exposed to the new technology that we have now.
Fair enough.
Yes. So Kyle, we're honored to have you on Brass Tacks Hard Facts for this new season, making your season debut here. So I want you to talk maybe about the episodes that you're involved in, your experience, and just sort of overall what that was like.
Brass tacks filming was the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole life. It was a difficult endeavor. I'm super stoked, and I was very honored to be able to participate in brass tacks. On my episodes, I believe we filmed 8 episodes, which are coming out pretty quick. It'll probably come out before this episode airs. But I did the flat load videos. We did some stream sound videos as well. And then we had a couple other videos that we shot, and I don't know which ones they're going to go with as officially as when they release them. So we filmed as much as we could. But I will tell you, it's a lot harder than you would think it would be, because you're not filming one episode. You're filming one episode 5 times, and then you move on to the next one, right? So like once I have a habit of just blacking out and talking. So at some point, when the director would say, stop, take it from this word, it's like, man, I don't even know if I said that word. I don't know where that word was said, man. So like that, it was the hardest thing that I've ever done. And I was very honored to be asked to be on the episodes. And while I was there, I had an extreme feeling of imposter syndrome. While I was there, I was like, man, what am I doing here? This is crazy. Because it's not like filming with your cell phone, shooting some videos for, an interview at a conference or something like that. It's a full production, man.
Right.
And it's definitely a lot different than you would think. I don't know how the guys, the actors do it every day.
The most demoralizing thing for me, because we use the same film crew for our Rig Recon videos, and the most demoralizing thing was, great take, awesome, now do it again.
Yeah,
well, hang
do it
on,
again, do it better.
It was good. Why do I have to do it again?
Yeah, we got it. What's the deal?
Yep.
But it was pretty cool to see the behind the scenes. One thing I thought was very interesting is that the whole set is wet. So they would wet down the entirety of the burn building, the entirety of the ground, and I didn't really realize why that was important until you get there. And then now you're able to merge takes together because everything's wet. So like if one part of it's dry and one part of it's wet, it doesn't look like a seamless take. So that was pretty cool. Being able to be on the inside of the filming of those videos, because they're short. They're like a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
Right.
But it took us a 12-hour day of filming to get, 8 episodes. So you're thinking in your head, like they're 2 minutes a piece, 8 episodes, that's like 16 minutes, right? No, not at all.
Yeah, it's I think the biggest thing is like like we're talking, I don't think until you're in it, you don't realize like the amount of preparation and like fine little things that go into like a 1-minute video that you could do on your cell phone in 1 minute. But it's like it's pretty bigger than that. So it's always neat to get perspective on that as well. But yeah, it's I think for the Rig Recon stuff, I think Jason and I spend more time cleaning and placing products than we do probably reading off the script for the video, for the 1 minute overview video.
Yeah, that was hard for me too, because on one of the episodes we had a table full of equipment in front, and like I would pick up a piece of equipment and talk about it, and then put it back in a different spot, and they'd be like, "Stop, put it back in the same spot." Like I don't know where I got it from. I don't know where it's supposed to go. I'm just a dumb fireman, man. You gotta put some labels here or something. The 2.5 increaser goes back here, right? But I was super honored to be a part of it, man, and I'm stoked to see them how they come out, and I have full faith in their editing ability, because I'm a goon, and I think they can make me sound pretty good. So we'll see.
No, it'll be great, and we're excited, and again honored to have you on and get your insight from the new season 4, which like you said, I think your episodes will probably debut around the same time, if not before this episode. So that'll be really exciting to tie those together. But as we sort of wrap up the conversation, we always like to give the audience the top 3 takeaways. So as we wrap up here, in your opinion, 3 things someone should consider when specifying a vehicle that is simply built to go attack fire.
Man, I think you need to start with the actual apparatus spec. If you do not spec your apparatus to be a War Wagon, it's hard to become one. So like being able to have low hose beds, and like I was saying earlier, to a point to where hose is chest hot, that's a big benefit. Then that leads you down the road of L-shaped tanks. Where are we going to put ladders? I can't have a tunneled ladder with a low hose bed 9 times out of 10. So like if I'm going to have a tunneled ladder, it's going to push my hose bed up. So like now I'm in a position to put ladders on the side of the rig, or even a ladder rack, in order to get that hose low. So like you have to start thinking about where I'm going to put a tack hose, where I'm going to put the things that I want in the compartments before we start building the whole piece of apparatus. So like I said, I built those rigs in my head for 10 years before I was able to get on the spec committee and actually build the rigs themselves. So like I had a decade to go through the problem solving phases with that apparatus spec, which was very highly beneficial for us. But going down to pickup tube locations, gauge size, like, do I want 600 PSI gauges or 400 PSI gauges? So like, I'm a big fan of 400 PSI gauges because it gives me the increments of 5 PSI. So like now I can split 5 PSI for 2.5 PSI versus having 600 PSI gauges with an increment of 10 or 20. Now it's harder to dial in those pressures, right? So like down to the little details of your apparatus spec will give you the ability to either be a War Wagon or a rescue engine. So like pickup tube locations is another one that I see that a lot of people fall short on. They don't really know that most pickup tube locations are in the drains of their discharges. So in your drains of your discharges is at your pump panel. So like if I put 5 outlets on the rear of my rig, and now my pickup tube locations are in the drains of those particular outlets, which is at the pump panel. Now I'm looking at between 5 and 30 psi difference between the actual pickup tube location and the discharge itself. So like I've seen 30 to 40 psi changes depending on the flow rate on a rear outlet. And then same with the front bumper. Like now if I'm speccing a front bumper line, I want to spec it with 3-inch, piping at least to where I can cut down that friction loss. Because now I've got 590s that's going over the wheel well and going through the front, the rails of the front to get to the front bumper. So I would say a second mistake that people make when they're on their rig spec is that as well. We wrote in our spec that our pickup tube locations are within 6 inches of the discharge. And it took a long time to get somebody in the room at our manufacturer that said yes. Like we would
just so everyone understands, because there's different terminology, just so everyone understands on the podcast here, he's talking about where you're going to tap into the pipe for your pressure, so that when you're looking at that pressure gauge, where exactly are you seeing that pressure at? And that's what Kyle's referring to as a pickup tube. Just want to make sure everyone understood that.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I'm from Texas. I got bad lingo.
You're good. You're good.
But one of the things we wrote into our spec is that particular location is within 6 inches of the discharge.
Right.
So like now we're looking at 1 to 2 PSI differences versus 20 to 40 PSI differences.
Yeah.
When we're looking at that gauge. So spec it out those particular details. And most people don't know what they don't know, right? Like you got to start asking people, getting job numbers, and that was the biggest benefit for us. And like I was saying, it took us a while to get a guy in the room at the apparatus spec committee meeting to say yes to that. And he's like, no, we can't do that. And I'm like, well, you can do that. Here's a job number where you've done it already, right? Like, so all you have to do is just go back to the job number and say, you've already done that. So like, bring your boss in here. Well, we can't do that. Okay, bring your boss in here. Like, I've got a blank check with no manufacturer's name on it. So like, if you want your name to be on this check, let's have some conversations where yes is the answer to these questions.
Awesome.
But, and then lastly, I would say their equipment that they're putting on the engine itself needs to be well thought out as the third one. Breakaway nozzles, threaded tips on smoothbore nozzles if we're going to be extending, standpipe kits. Standpipe kits are very beneficial, not only in standpipe buildings, but going long as well. If I'm going 400 feet away from the rig and I'm using 3-inch to get there, a standpipe kit gives me the ability to bring the pump panel right there. So like have them over pump that trunk line, and now I've got the ability to control flow rate and discharge pressure right there. So going back to the War Wagon mindset, being able to build your equipment spec around being useful on the fire ground. Can I build a long line with my nozzle that's on the 2.5 versus having to use a gated Y or a bell reducer? Building those dual purpose lines together are highly beneficial in that mindset. So if I lead out with 2.5 with a smoothbore nozzle and a threaded tip on it, now I have the ability to go down to 1 3/4 without having to bring anything else. All you have to do is bring the bundle. So I can't fight fire with a gated Y. I can't fight fire with a bell reducer. So being able to have those defensive and offensive postures built into your setup is highly beneficial, but it takes thought process into your spec to do that. So hopefully that answers your question. It's very long.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, that's great.
I just blacked out and had verbal diarrhea.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. And a lot of great points today and things to think about. And I think, the common theme throughout all the episodes that we do is that you got to pay attention to the details. Every one thing affects another, no matter how you set it up or what your purpose is going to be. And I think that's just the key thing you have to take away there. But as we finish out today, Jason, I'll open it up for final comments, and then we'll wrap up another great episode here.
Yeah, great comments, great thought. I think you summarized it all in saying, think ahead about what you're going to do. It's very, very difficult to take delivery of something that's not designed to do what you want and then make it work. Now you just wasted, in these days, $1 million and 3 or 4 years of time.
For sure.
So yeah, think ahead. And again, thanks so much for joining. I think the info's been terrific.
Thanks for having me, guys. And don't be afraid, the listeners, contact other fire departments. Like if you know a fire department that's really dialed in and their apparatus is a certain spec, ask them why they did what they did. Get some job numbers, start looking at pump panel packages, so like reach out to people, that have solved these problems already. So like you're in an apparatus spec committee, you've got a list of problems in front of you that the majority of the American Fire Service has already either addressed or even solved at their own organization. So don't hesitate to reach out to people and get job numbers, get pump panel, assignments. So like one thing that I figured out was through the hard part is that 4-inch piping is very expensive. So like when I wanted to spec my large diameter discharge on the officer side, I wanted 4-inch straight to the pump. I didn't want it to come out 2.5 and then blow out to 4-inch, because now I've got friction loss in there. And I found out that 4-inch is $100 an inch. So my 18 inches of 4-inch was $1,800, but it's beneficial. So reach out to your folks. They've solved your problems already.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, great stuff today. And again, this has been another episode of Rig Recon Live. Kyle, thanks for joining us. We do really appreciate your time. If you haven't already, make sure you follow us on social media. Check out our website, rigrecon.com. And again, you can find this podcast wherever you get your podcast. Until then, spec the best.